The Center for Teaching and Learning is showcasing faculty innovations in and out of the classroom, and we're creating a space for faculty to share ideas and learn from each other's experiences. This is one of a series of informal conversations where we ask a faculty member to describe and demonstrate their innovative practices. We're speaking today with Jason Van Nest, Associate Professor in the Architecture Department of the School of Architecture and Design. Jason earned his Master's of Architecture at Yale School of Architecture in 2005 and a Bachelor's of Science in Architecture at the Georgia Institute of Technology in 1999. He started at New York Tech in 2009 and has prior teaching experience at Yale and at New York School of Interior Design. He's a licensed architect who has contributed to several award-winning projects. Jason also consults with architecture firms about building information modeling, which in conversation you will hear as BIM, helping them use advanced technology to improve their project delivery workflows. We'll have time for questions at the end of the interview, and you're welcome to add questions and comments to the chat as we go. Welcome, Jason.
Hooray. Good to see you, Fran.
So I know you teach about a dozen different courses at New York Tech. Which one is your absolute favorite and why?
I certainly have some darling courses in the School of Architecture. I ran the gambit while I was still on the tenure track to try and teach as much of the curriculum that we offer as possible, just to sort of understand the entire school and its mechanisms. But I was brought on by the previous dean, Judy DeMaio, to introduce building information modeling workflows, right, into the appropriate places in our curriculum. I just had gotten a head start. And so the first and most natural place for me to do a deep dive was the construction documents course that the School of Architecture offers every student that gets a 4 or 5 year degree. And it's just a fantastic course because we walk in the first day, we hand students photographs of a building, maybe a vague plan or elevation of the building. We create teams and we spend 16 weeks forensically constructing the building through a construction document set. And you see students, time and time again, making assumptions, testing them, and really getting sort of their feet under themselves professionally, because they're learning both a sort of graphic way of creating legally binding documents, but also sort of interacting with their medium, architecture, in the way that they will for the next foreseeable future, 10, 15, 20 years. A lot of students come in, confused architecture students and leave having taken their first confident steps in the profession. It's really wonderful. It's why I insist on teaching it every semester. I think I'm over 20 times teaching it now, and I run into the classroom the first day, every semester.
Nice. So they're taking photographs of a building and they're essentially reverse engineering it. Is that what you're saying? Yes,
it's so much more. It's so great. Really, what's happening in the whole profession in the last 10 years is fantastic. And since we mentioned building information modeling in the intro, allow me to just go through a very quick mental exercise. I'm sure we've all had like a physics or a physical science class, maybe in middle school or high school. And you go in and there's a Bunsen burner and a cup of water, and you just time the flow rate on the Bunsen burner to 1. It takes 4 minutes to boil. You write that down. And then you get a new glass of water and turn up the flow rate. You write down 3 minutes. Do this a couple times. And in the 8th grade or so, we had to use maybe a spreadsheet, or maybe you actually had to plot it by hand, but you made a plot, you turned it in, you got a grade. And, in many ways, architecture has been taught like that for 100 years, ever since we started forming architecture schools. Our laboratory is studio, and we don't really have access to our medium, concrete, brick, steel. We don't really build buildings in our studios. We build models of the building. And the problem here is that the models are representations. It's a picture of the thing you imagined, or it's a chipboard model. So what makes this class so great and this technology kind of game changing is, imagine you made an Excel spreadsheet, and you have like the flow rate was 1, the diameter never changes at the Bunsen burner, right? And then flow rate at 1, it took what's the independent variable? Like it took 4 minutes to boil, and then flow rate up 2 minutes to boil. Imagine you could reach into the spreadsheet. You could change the diameter of the Bunsen burner, right? And right here on your lab desk, you could see your Bunsen burner like jet out more fuel and actually measure it go faster, right? Or let's say you go in your spreadsheet, and instead of saying, the flow rate was 9, you accidentally type 90, and suddenly your Bunsen burner is like a jet fuel. Whoa, you get burned a little, and right? That reverses representation. Suddenly the representation you had of all your data becomes the thing that affects reality. That's what building information modeling is now for teaching architecture and for architects, because we used to draw elevations, but now in the elevation we can like move a window, or we can raise the roof or something, and all the plans and everything else change. The perspective changes, and suddenly you're in a laboratory where everything you touch has an effect that's worthy of exploration. So this class is the first introduction of that technology, not just that sort of graphic language. And watching students in that magical kind of Harry Potter laboratory, which is an environment where everything you change is affects everything else, students that get it quickly are very empowered. And you get way too much credit for being, the guy that taught them that, instead of what is the truth, which is now you have a new challenge. What new architecture can you think of with this tool? We've had generations of folks that didn't have access to this. Let's see what we can figure out now. And so I love capturing my students out of that class and going straight into Project Integration Studio, because I want to see what they think of next, right? We did 16 weeks of trying to reproduce one technology or one building. Now what? What do you want to do? And
this is fascinating.
It's really great.
I talked to one of your colleagues probably a decade ago, and he was talking about CAD and drawing plans manually versus using CAD. And he was talking about how the technology bias the kind of designs you create.
Oh.
And it sounds like this is taking that challenge up exponentially, like 2 dimensions into 3. So
I am biased, as you can tell, this whole conversation, right? But I think technology in many ways is a misunderstood word in the English language. And the way that I wish that conversation was framed 10 years ago is, does the mode of representation bias the designs we make? And I think that's absolutely true. And thus the technologies we make in order to make these representations. Really, you can't solve any problems you can't see. If you can't see the problem, you can't turn it around, look at it, and solve it. And so the way we represent future buildings greatly biases the problems we're solving with those buildings, or the cultures we're making with these buildings. And so it's only gotten to be a more rich and robust conversation, both in the discipline and the practice, with the arrival of these tools. Why are you using this tool? What is it that we should be doing with this tool that we couldn't before? They're all, front and center in studio.
Fascinating. So going back from the technology to the people, is there a teacher or a student that you've had that really changed how you approach teaching?
Yes. Sometimes fate really has smiled on me in many ways. And, my first sort of significant office assignment was next to Michelle Bertoman in the School of Architecture, who passed, I think, in 2014, no longer with us. And The best thing, one of the best things about sitting next to her and telling her my concerns and getting direct and indirect advice was that she knew nothing about the technologies that I just spilled about. But she was a consummate uh, um, sympathizer, empathizer. She really connected with her students in ways that I still hold myself against. Here almost a decade later, Michelle taught me that when you walk into a classroom, you have three projects. The lowest level project from Michelle, and she would take this as a compliment, is the transfer of technical information, right? Sort of what's on the label for that class. And she took that seriously, but she thought it was the lowest level job. The second thing that she felt architects were doing, at least or professionals were doing in the classroom, was demonstrating how professionals behave. And the way to unpack and repackage problems in front of young professionals who are learning these sort of methods of thinking and methods of acting. The highest level for Michelle was to teach students to love something, to give them permission to fall in love with a discipline, with a medium, with whatever it is. And she didn't, I think, piecing together even years later her commentary, I don't think she taught directly how to love something, but instead demonstrated her love for the medium of architecture and for all the little footholds she got into these magical worlds of buildings and building sciences. And in doing so, demonstrating to students that it's okay. It's even sort of highly rewarding to fall in love with the discipline and to nerd out in the way that you're going to nerd out, because we all nerd out. And I didn't have a respect for the fact that high school is really, really hard. I kind of put all that behind me because I was definitely a geek and a nerd and too busy in chess club to really realize what kind of goofball I was. And the way that she showed students how to make that more than your personal identity, but the thing that will enrich you of your own mind in your own garden. I think it was, one of the most important moments of my professional career. Was just sitting next to her in awe.
So
I think that answers your question.
It does beautifully. What a beautiful tribute to Michelle. It really is.
It's her every day.
How did that change how you approach classes and students and teaching?
It changed it fundamentally. So it's really hard to summarize it. I was really worried at first about being the rule giver and the umpire and the great communicator. And when I really embodied her indirect lessons to me, it helped me give students permission to find their way instead of being the pathfinder for the students. So I don't know if you ever bumped into Joseph Campbell's work. He makes a distinction. This is about mythology and, the role of religion in society. So I just build an analogy here. But he makes a distinction between a priest and a shaman. So the priest is the rule giver and the representative of divinity on earth. The shaman is the guy who sets up the teepee and gets the peyote ready and puts you in the sweat lodge and tells you you're gonna go on this walk and you're gonna find an owl. Okay, now the owl is gonna trick you. Watch out for the owl. Go the other way, right? And she changed my mentality about teaching from the priestly actions to the shaman actions. You're on a journey, student. I am here for you every step of the way, but you got to take these steps. I'm not going to push you. I'm not going to, wallop you or anything. And if you find the owl and I tell you not to follow the owl and you follow the owl, well, you're going to learn something I can't teach you any other way. That's Godspeed to you, So she taught me how to be the kind of shaman in the room and not necessarily, I hope that makes sense.
That's beautiful. Yes, that makes perfect sense to me. So I'm going to shift gears.
Okay.
Let's talk about COVID. Let's talk about what happened a year ago when New York Tech went completely virtual. How did you feel, first of all? As we talk about chaos and frustration.
We had already an apartment that was too small, before spending 16 hours a day in it. And so balancing teaching through a Zoom webcam, and just getting through the material with the sort of pressures, on my side of the camera was really quite distracting for the first 2 months. And then I realized some really terrible things, which was my position was privileged. A lot of our students who come from all over the New York region, occasionally were in a household where they weren't really safe, or where they didn't have the technology and resources they needed that we offered on campus, or that they were struggling with all sorts of natural mental health issues that extend from a partial imprisonment. And so
what
honestly,
did they change then?
You mean like after summer when it became,
No, as you're realizing this, right? So you've got this technical, very hands-on subject where you might want to be side by side with a student modifying things.
Right.
And now you're across a computer.
Yeah.
And there's all the pressures and there's all the obstacles that the students have. So how did you modify in the spring?
I don't want to project, too much competence here. But, this model that I've inherited from colleagues, where compassion and a sort of leading with your heart is more important than the technical. If you go back and you look at that semester's technical output, I think you're going to see a dip, quite frankly. And, if I ever had to defend myself professionally, I'd say it was COVID. But the truth is, I would start every meeting after, 2 or 3, after spring break, I would start with, how are we feeling out here? Everybody, let's just stand up, take your headphones out, shake it out a bit, come back to me, tell me the worst part. If you want to share with the class, tell me the worst part of your week this week. How are we coping? And I lost 20 minutes to that when people, the third or fourth time, would start, revealing some of the struggles we had. The other thing I did was just end all lectures. Everything got recorded and then just face to face, and as a result, very little technical information went across the bandwidth, comparatively speaking. But a lot more of just like, I hear you, man. Oh, dude, that stinks. A lot more of that happened.
And it sounds like the students were responding.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to be the compassionate professor when the other 4 you see that week are less, right? Then you're given sort of a purview and a permission that they aren't. The downside is you're easier to disappoint. And so if you're afraid of a professor, you'll definitely do better in the class, just acting out perhaps from the wrong emotional place. But if you have a professor where you're comfortable disappointing them, you're more likely to disappoint them. So it was a trade-off. And it's one I protected myself against in the next 2 semesters.
It's interesting that you're saying that, because at the same time, when students connect with a professor, their motivation increases and they'll work harder. And often that's a stimulus to perform better. So this is
I stand corrected.
Counterpoint.
Yeah, I think when the subject is part of their personal identity, that I've seen research that really proves this beyond the shadow of a doubt. And I think the part that my teaching experience overlaps and doesn't overlap with this research is when that subject is part of their personal identity. So, hey, I'm connecting with this professor. I'm falling in love with the same things or related things that they're falling in love with. And I want to pursue this further. then I see, boy, you just can't rip them away from their homework. And how often do you get to say that, right? But if it's like, yeah, it's my ballroom dancing professor, and I got to get this other stuff out, and I really am passionate about ballroom dancing. What could have been in those cases is not, I think, as pronounced as what you'd see when it really is part of their personal identity. So I just put an asterisk, I think, on there. There are some of my students in the School of Architecture that are going to inherit like the family business, and it's related to architecture. It's why they're studying architecture, but it also creates a distance. Oh, that's interesting. Right. So
you alluded to changes you made as we were going into the fall. Right? In last spring, we were all blindsided and had to make this emergency pivot. But we knew pretty early in the summer that classes would be remote. So what did you change when you knew you were going into this for the semester and it was more intentional?
So the fundamental problem, I don't think this is unique to architecture students, but the fundamental problem, I think, with the way classes were delivered in the 90s, aughts, and whatnot, was that it was always meant to be material in a seminar. It was always meant to be not a debate, but a discourse between two voices, the textbook, which the student was supposed to read before stepping into the classroom, and then the professor who would represent the material on the blackboard or whatever, using their own voice and their own thinking, filling in gaps, and ultimately creating something larger than what one person could present, right? Because it was a body of information. And, ever since I've taught, and I'm sure actually my own behavior reflects this, students don't read. High-performing students will achieve many of the course readings, and more than half of my students weekly demonstrate that they have not executed the reading. Enter COVID, where I can't even get that primary introduction to material on the board in front of them. So I started recording my lectures, giving them a textbook in the lectures, and praying that they look at one or the other. The course that we talked about before, construction documents, I really wallop them on the midterm. Hey, this was in chapter 7. Wait, this was in chapter 9. What happened? But I discovered pretty early on, I'm embarrassed to say not in the summer, but in the fall, they weren't watching the lectures either. They're just trying to jump straight to the assignment. And I think that's something unique to architecture, that we're definitely a product-driven, okay, maybe not. A lot of the way we teach in studio is kind of like what's on the boards. And so the impulse for architecture students is to hurry up and get drawing, produce. And that's just a very big problem. But I started seeking Noreen's help, actually, about embedding Cultura questions into my lectures, counting those questions as quizzes. So I didn't have a quiz anymore. And then simple questions, 3/4 of the way through, you can't skip. The professor in the thing says, oh, and then, the sky is blue and the grass is green. Quiz comes up. What color is the sky, right? Not gotcha questions, not application. Just, are you paying attention? The same thing Netflix does when you haven't interacted with a movie for a while. They're like, I'm streaming you. I saw student work improve immediately when they got sort of credit for paying attention. And, I'm the first person to really be turned off by participation awards, but it smoothed out the classroom interactions, because then all of my classroom interaction, on Zoom could be team to professor, no download of information anymore. You do that on your time when you're on the subway, whenever you've got the time. And then let's talk about how you've perceived the information, how you've ingested the information, and how you plan to reproduce the information.
Allow me to reframe participation awards.
Sure. I said this to Fred. I better be careful now.
So for starters, participation is better than an attendance grade, right? I always, yes, when I'm talking to faculty, attendance is not part of the grade, but participation is. And the way that I frame this to my students is learning is hard work. And I expect you to invest time and energy and attention in learning. So as a way of recognizing that work, this counts towards your grade.
Right.
So by ascribing points to it, I'm telling the students that this matters. This matters to me. It matters to you. By telling the students that learning is hard work, I'm telling them that if they're struggling, that's okay. That's what they're supposed to be doing. And if you look at theories of how we learn, retrieval practice, going back into your brain and pulling out that information is critical to learning. Because if you think about a grassy field and you walk across the field once, there's a faint track, right, where the grass is bent down. But the more you walk on that track, the deeper the bends, right? And the more clear the path is. And then if you come back a year later or a month later or a week later and you walked across once, you can't tell where you walked. But if you walked back and forth 50 times, you could still see.
Yeah.
And our brains work the same way. The more you retrieve a memory and the more ways you get to that memory, the grass is green, that means the sky is blue. Oh, the sky is blue because the molecules are diffracting the light. So if I have multiple ways to get to that information and I use them repeatedly, I'm literally strengthening the connections, the neuronal connections in my brain. And that makes it easier to get that information when I want it, when I need it. So if you tell that to the students also, that this is backed by a lot of research on how people learn, this is going to help. And acknowledge that it's work and tell them, I don't expect this to be a cakewalk. I expect this to challenge you. That's why you're here, is to be challenged and learn and then cement that knowledge. Well, cement might not be good for architects, into your brain in a way that you can get it back. Then the students are going to see the purpose for the task and what the benefit is to them. And so they're less likely to resent any kind of periodic quizzing you put in because they're going to see the value of it.
I mean, there's so much wisdom you're throwing down here. So much of it resonates. But I just want to sort of respond to two things, which I really highly value, which is it took me a long time to even get inside my own skin back as an architecture student and realize that, the mediums of learning matter, and the multiple mediums you have to get to the same concept, the more likely it is that you'll access it and retain it. So, I remember learning in psychology class that if you watch someone lecture, you got, some unit of retention. If you write down what they lecture, you get 2 more units, because the process of writing is another memory. And then the view, the picture, I can see those notes, is yet another way to access. I think you were referring to those. And that's why I'm kind of okay with remote teaching at high graduate or high undergraduate levels, where students are well mediated. They're in their mediums and they're thinking in terms of mediums, because I think it's fantastic that I have to record a lecture and that they hear it, they see it. And, if they can't take notes, they remember the quiz question, they remember getting it wrong, they remember so many different steps about interfacing with the material. And you highlighting that really reveals, I'm so embarrassed for him, the cynicism and what I reflected when I say participation awards. I think what I'm really, frustrated with is a culture of inflated grades where, there's a pressure on professors to say, well, the student really put in a lot of effort, and that's not really a reflection of what a collegiate grade is. And I think that's where, I'm just being grumpy, white-haired old, I just need a beard and patches here, and I can probably retire with a pipe.
I think the hair is gray.
Yeah, it's already there. I should have.
So that goes to something else, right? Any task you're giving your students should be helping them get to the learning outcomes.
Absolutely.
And if it's not, throw it away.
Absolutely.
And then make sure the students know that, right? I have very carefully curated a set of learning experiences for you to get you here.
Yep. Yeah. It's very easy to have sort of token assignments that just review. But one of the reasons I really love teaching construction documents is I've taught it so many times that I've been able to tweak and really ensure the most on ramps per exercise. I have this theory, Fran. I don't know if I should reveal this. Do my students watch this? Because we got to turn off the recording, right? Which is, I grade all their work just for, did you represent something through to midterm? And then in midterm, I warn them first, hey, I'm going to evaluate your midterm project like it's a legal document. And I'm going to wallop you. It's going to be hard. And, all the grades in the class reflect that. But what happens next is some of the most important magic, I think, at the college level. Integrity kicks in. Students say, oh, but I'm not a D- student. I'm an A student. So I have an unlimited extra credit policy in the class to help everybody recover from that. And then you see people choose the extra credit assignment to make up midterm credit based on what they want to learn and having access to this material that they guide, because it's extra credit, right? I'm not going to teach you how to make a structural plan. And what happens is they're put on their butt. They have to, dig deep. They say, I can make this right. And they choose the path they're going to use to make it right. And some of the best, presentations in the class are not mine, but when I require students to present their extra credit for a minute or two, and, they're taking ownership of their experience, not just the material they're presenting. They're, redeeming in some ways their professional standing, and it's just it's heartbreaking stuff to watch. You're just like, that was great.
How many of your students do this? How many take advantage of it?
Oh, I'd say at least half every semester. Maybe 2/3. But that's really a reflection on sort of how, honestly, I grade their midterm projects. It might not be.
It's also a reflection of the relationship you've built with them.
Yep.
The fact that you told them what would happen and you care about their learning and they know it. If they did not have that relationship with you, they would throw their hands up and walk away. So the fact that the students are doing this work, I think speaks really highly of what you've learned from Michelle, that their relationships with the students are the most important thing. And then the learning will follow.
I take the compliment, Fran, but I really think it's the quality of the student. I've seen students fall on their butt and just walk away. You have too. And the fact that so many, carry this strong level of integrity, thank you for what you've said. I will take, part of the credit. But when it comes to someone picking themselves up and gritting their teeth, all you can do is create the sort of game board and the rules, and then they make the choices.
That's exactly right. How does it feel when you see your students get excited about learning and do that?
Everybody who watches this knows exactly. It's a validation of why we chose this profession. It's a validation of the path you've chosen and the decisions you've made. It's an extension of your potency in the world to see them more potent because of it. It's empowering to know the world will be a little better place because someone else is walking around, not with my passion, but the passion that they've forged in sort of the crucible of bad grades and textbooks and red marks and whatnot. There's this, I don't want to take your time too much, but there's a tradition in many Japanese towns to tear down the temple every generation and rebuild it. And they don't destroy anything, but it's an opportunity for one generation to teach the woodworking techniques to the next generation. Sometimes the temples just get a little taller or something, right? They add one thing every generation. It's an exercise to teach, woodworking, but it's handing over identity and handing over values. And so when a student stands up at slam dunks, the temple is being made again. The great, worship temple of architecture. So it's bigger than me at that point. And, you're just lucky to witness it.
That's lovely. So as we hope, as we move into a post-COVID world, which of your innovations do you think you'll keep?
Well, so we talked originally about building information modeling as a medium that's really helping architects everywhere, not just my students. And one of the joys I have is teaching in this medium. And what COVID has revealed is that, once they're in their laboratory and their physical relationship to me, like in the same room, it's actually secondary to their relationship to their medium. And their success is going to be related to that. So I'm asking, my chair and my dean, can I stay remote and blended? Because it's working better at the high undergraduate level in ways that, they have control of the lessons they learn and the times they need to. And it's actually a DEI benefit. Because a lot of our students, we were founded as a commuting school. A lot of our students actually work 40 hours a week and go to college. And so I got to take time off. I got to go to campus, and I have to consume this lecture the professor's going to give while I'm eating Oreos in the back and, quickly having street meat or whatever before I go and babysit my younger brother. That pressure's off. You can see some students are logging in at 1 a.m. because they're interested, they're excited, or they're catching up. And what I really was not sensitive to was I formed groups of 3. And the students that come from better backgrounds can take time off to come to campus and do our coursework in the computer lab, on a day that's not a class day. But the students that don't have that kind of financial or schedule freedom would have I can only come Saturday morning. I got to leave by 11. And so once you detach our students and they can do their homework collaboratively in these environments, all 3 cursors are moving around in the model virtually at the same time, then the students that were penalized for not being able to get on campus to do this work, that penalty is lifted, and they can contribute so much more robustly in these mediums where everybody's building a building at the same time. So in Studio and in where I use the same technology and in construction documents, I'm seeing a much higher throughput from my students, all the students, and unfortunately more conflicts, because the more time they spend in the environment, the more they have to. But since this is the technology architects are developing for themselves and have adopted for the last 5 to 10 years, it's the best New York Tech introduction to how to behave in an architectural office as a medium, not just how do you talk over the water cooler, but what are our professional ways of behaving inside the medium. So I really can't wait to build on the achievements that we've been offered, with these tools.
This is inspiring. This is really very inspiring, Jason.
Cheers.
And I'll note at the beginning, you talked about a different level or a different aspect of equity, that not all of the students had the technology at home that they needed to do the work. But I'll note that architecture has been phasing in a computing requirement, right? And so you haven't seen that yet teaching the upper level classes. But next year, or maybe the year after, your students will have the computers at home.
Yeah, as a credit to New York Tech, a lot of New York Tech equipment went out to students. Sometimes they literally ripped a computer out of our computer lab and just shipped it to a student. And the larger DEI issue is literally how much RAM does a student have in their laptop? Because more RAM for architects, bigger, more complex models. And so we have gently phased in this laptop requirement, I think, that you're referencing. I'm seeing students, and I'm also seeing students that took shortcuts because we're not like policing it. We're just saying you need this. And those shortcuts really bite these students who had to couldn't afford, the $2,000 laptop. And so one of the things I'm really interested in is a new technology that many firms are adopting, where all the computation happens on the firm server. The virtualized desktop is made. The firm server does the computation. And so it doesn't matter. You could have a Chromebook, you could have a low RAM. It's just an internet appliance where you're driving a virtual machine, ideally at New York Tech servers. And we just take that right out of the equation. It's expensive. It's a new technology. It's expensive. One can hope over the next couple of years we can phase some of that in
that
the
would be
pressure
terrific.
points. Yeah.
So I like to wrap up these conversations with recommendations. Is there a particular app or a particular technology that makes your teaching better that is applicable to other disciplines? You can't respond with BIM here.
Sorry. Yeah, that's fair, isn't it?
Or something that streamlines your work of preparation or grading.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I gotta recognize, Noreen really helped me embed Kaltura, quizzes into my lectures. And all the policing that quizzes usually took in class is all automated and now in the background. The lecture is delivered. So I can spend a lot more of that luxurious time face-to-face with students and sometimes flipping the classroom and saying, let's you teach me what you learned this week. How is this applying to your projects? What are ways that you were surprised that this application would happen? And, what problems and challenges are going to result from, someone misinterpreting, this lesson? All of that now is all my class, right? And so, it is fair to say that I'm actually extending my class because they have to consume a lecture first. But in truth, my classes are shorter because, the first hour that used to be a lecture is now trimmed right off. When students arrive, they're present. They're right there. They know that they can't sit in the back and doodle while they know there'll be, directed questions where I start with their first name and then I ask them a question. They better be on point. And I do less than half the talking. I do less than a quarter of the talking sometimes. And, because we teach in teams or team group work, teaching team, conflicts which are natural become acceptable to bring up in the classroom environment, where normally it'd be like, oh, we can't tell the professor we're fighting about this. We can spend more time focusing on the way that people will have trouble with the medium and with dividing work and, applying these ways for an audience, the course lessons for a legal audience or for a professional building audience. All of that is empowered simply because I can put a quiz in a lecture and let the automation let me focus on the student experience.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure. Cheers.
Jason, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. We've had so many conversations in my office in the city, and every time we talk, I leave with all sorts of new ideas, and can't thank you enough. So
it's been a pleasure.
We have been talking today with Jason Van Nest, Associate Professor of Architecture in the School of Architecture and Design. This conversation is part of the Great Teaching series and will be available on the Center for Teaching and Learning webpage, nyit.edu/CTL. If you'd like to be featured in the Great Teaching series, please email the Center for Teaching and Learning at ctl@nyit.edu. Or better yet, fill out the form at bit.ly/great-teaching. Thanks so much for joining us.